are equal to me and every other man I can think of. So why have them penalized for merely being female? Cambridge's ancient attitude seems to be simply pure, well, it's bullshit. I'm sorry, but I can't find a healthier, cleaner way to say it.
Yep.
Healthier and cleaner.
Just a moment, please. Yes, that is profanity, and we don't allow that at council.
Oh, well, like I said, I'm really sorry.
We apologize, and you will wrap up your comments. Thank you.
I will. I'm revisiting and reconsidering your decision not to offer free women hygiene products for women and visitors to Cambridge would go a long way to bringing back this council to the progressive place it's been in Canadian society. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks. Right, we will move forward to item number 9, which is the Cambridge Neighbourhood Table. We have a couple of delegations coming forward this evening. Keith Rivers and Joanne McComb are first. They're the co-chairs of the Cambridge Neighbourhood Table, so please come forward. And welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your Worship, Mayor McGarry, City Councillors, City staff. My name is Keith Rivers. I'm co-chair of Cambridge Neighbourhood Table Steering Committee, and with me is Joanne McComb, Executive Director of Cambridge Neighbourhood Association. We are delegating tonight to seek City of Cambridge Council approval for Cambridge's request for $70,000 in startup funding for the Cambridge Neighbourhood Table. Should there be approval and commitment today, this will result in the earliest possible opening date for our first location. We will briefly review how it started, who was involved, what was learned, our partners going forward, community support, and how the City of Cambridge can play a crucial role in getting this much-needed service started. The activities leading up to and the development of the implementation plan was a truly broad-based community response to a widely recognized city need. The staff report you received has outlined much of the history. Suffice it to say that the program has been developed and refined many times over through consultations with experts. Strong encouragement from senior city management has been evident. As plans developed, abundant encouragement and support from faith-based groups became apparent. Here is a list of those involved in the consultations, presentations, meetings, and discussions to understand the need, define and refine what should be done and methods key for the successful implementation, to identify risks and concerns along with possible mitigations, and to seek advice and validation. While information gathering during the process of development, every attempt was made to be open to the experience and advice of others and to use this knowledge in the development of a plan uniquely shaped to our city's needs and the existing landscape of services. Our goal was to collaborate with existing agencies to avoid duplication and competition for funding while smartly redeploying existing resources. This slide encapsulates key principles that have been used to shape the plan. Each of these items could involve a long discussion to plumb their depth, but in summary, relationships are key to assisting our most vulnerable populations through social inclusion without stigma, in which all individuals participate as equals. Such a program in today's complex environment requires skilled professional leadership and the involvement of neighborhoods with strong community support, all of which are cornerstones for success. There is always some risk involved in achieving important rewards, and to that end, we have consulted at length with existing providers and will rely on Ray of Hope expertise going forward. we have a reasonable security plan in place. The program will depend on compassionate volunteers to create a community where everyone belongs and wants to participate as neighbors support and help each other.
Thank you. A credible amount of work has been done by co-chairs Dan Clements and Keith Rivers. Many meal programs visited, people consulted, and over 20 experts consulted. Late summer was the introduction to the neighborhood associations in Cambridge. We had conversations and learnings on behalf of each other and began the evolution of the Cambridge Neighborhood Table. We've been working, the neighborhoods work within a local community development framework. We meet people where they're at, including residents in the identification of issues, solutions, and implementation. Recreation is a vehicle in which we conduct our community development work. This has become much more than a meal service. It's about community. No one person or organization can take on the complex issues we are faced with. We're incorporated the studies and the recommendations of the report. A community meal in community development, a meal is key. It's equally important, our relationships, the need to belong and to be wanted. Cambridge, who will lead the project, are located in the south end of Cambridge, Southwood and Christopher Champlain, serving a population base of 24,000. A key advantage of this distributed model is location flexibility. If a particular location is not working out for any reason, it can easily be moved to a different location. 4 additional neighborhood organizations to date fully support the new initiative of the Cambridge Neighborhood Table and will be considering how they can get involved. The following are 2 additional letters of support recently received. Langs is citing the need and endorsement of our plan and willingness to become a host site. Another key community partner with extensive knowledge and expertise has endorsed this program. This letter from the Cambridge Shelter Corporation verifies the need and endorses the leadership of Cambridge and potential connection to other neighborhood associations. This is the current list of 16 Baith communities giving serious consideration to active support of the Cambridge Neighborhood Table. This list shows the wide spread of support, and we have not yet spoken with all communities. The startup plan depends on critical initial cash funding from the city and the region to hire staff and make the first site operational so that a foundation is put in place to grow the program and make a financial campaign to the community possible. Our conversations to date with experienced agencies have provided assurance that in-kind support is available. Once started, we will gain further momentum. With the city's help, we plan to work together to make Cambridge a better community to live in for all citizens. Just imagine a person on the street, an isolated senior, working poor, single-parent families, newcomers connected to the meal program, have a meal, have conversations. We build relationships over time, get connected to the neighborhoods, volunteer, and with skill development, share their ability with the community. Then there's belonging with the neighborhood. Volunteers and guests intermingled and connected. Thank you for your attention and support.
Thank you very much. Questions or comments? First up is Councillor Mehta.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. Through you, thank you for the presentation. My question has to do with, like in the long term, being financially sustainable. What kind of steps should be taken?
So we've been, as you've heard, we've been looking at community interest as well, and the wide variety from the faith-based. It's a continuum that's within there, and some of it is financial. As you know, we've recently received some support from the region. We also, as going long-term, as we get the startup seeds going, we've had people that we've been speaking to are having some pledges putting forward of interest.
And just another question, Your Worship. Thank you. My other question has to do with security and maintaining that safe environment.
Yep.
And what kind of steps should be taken? Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. We will be having an advisory committee, and within that advisory committee, we'll have some of the expertise around meal programs that have already been run throughout the region. As well, staff will be highly trained in de-escalation and in some of the issues that may come forward. The other pieces we do have in the project project, security hired to attend each of the meals in the evening to make sure everybody has exited the premises safely, and also do going around in the neighborhood as well to ensure that everyone has moved on.
Thank you. Councillor Liggett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a much more extensive report than before, so I thank you for that. And I'm happy to see that you got some funding from the region, but they didn't fund you for the 2-year project, right? So when I watched that program, I noticed there was a question put to you that wasn't really answered, so I'm going to ask it again if you don't mind. You had stated, I think, Keith, reasonable security, right? I think that's how you worded it, reasonable security plan in place. My concern isn't just with the building and the property that it's on. My concern goes out to the greater community around it, the neighborhood around. And it's not to do with majority, probably 99% of the people that are going to be using this facility. It's that other 1% or less that could be causing the problems. And you also say it's to act as a safeguard for the location and the neighborhood. So are you relying on the neighborhood to call the police if they have a problem? Or how do you, and then if you do have problems, how do you get out of this?
Yes, well, we've talked to the Ray of Hope about that, and in addition, we've spoken with the police, and there are a number of things that can be done. First of all, you know, our staff are going to be carefully trained in terms of how to deal with issues in the center itself. Secondly, the security agency that we're hiring will be there to survey the grounds, but not only will they be surveying the grounds, they will also traverse through the local area to make sure that people have left or that are not staying in the neighborhood. And they will be in a position to call for help if that's needed, to recognize a problem and do that. We also spoke with the regional police deputy chief, and he is, and they're willing to institute patrols within the neighborhood at those particular times when people are coming and leaving. And you know what they did assure me was that, you know, yes, we can put this on the patrol program, but we can't be guaranteeing that there's going to be a patrol every night. I mean, we understand that sometimes the police get busy, but the fact that there will be a routine patrol instituted will do a lot to discourage people hanging around and loitering. And also, we have also learned through the experience, actually at Dan's condo, because they've had security folks there, that once it becomes knowledge that security is present and patrolling the area, that tends to discourage people coming into the area. And the fact that it might even be intermittent isn't necessarily a bad thing, because people don't necessarily know when the police or the security agency is going to show up. So in fact, you know, when you think about it, this particular area is going to have a little more focus than it would even before the program was instituted. So that could be seen as some kind of a benefit. And we are very much concerned about this, and we'll be relating with the local neighbors just to make sure that there aren't any issues. Our advisory committee will be tasked with dealing with any concerns that come up, and we're going to do our best to be a good neighbor in the community.
I have a second question, but I'll wait for others.
Okay, further questions or comments? I do have one, and probably directed to you, Joanne. You had talked about the staff being trained in de-escalation techniques, and anybody dealing with members of the public that may be vulnerable certainly need this type of training. Who will be providing that training?
We will be working with the Ray of Hope's model, and contacts will be discussing with them who they have used, and also they have some of the trainings involved. All of volunteers and staff will have some very significant training before any program begins.
Thank you. Councillor Devine.
Yes, thank you through the chair. Thank you for your presentation. And more importantly, thanks for all the hard work that the group has done the last year. It's been difficult, and you've certainly opened yourselves up for criticism. All right, but you've done a good job. And I see here I have an ask of $70,000, and the region has also agreed to give you 50, is my understanding?
Through their innovation grant.
I'm sorry?
Through their innovation grant.
Innovation grant. So if that was to get approved tonight here at council, when would you start?
We'd have 3 months. We would be starting up with 3 months within receipt of finances. So to start the hiring process, the training, neighborhood consultation, etc. So the first meal, we could be looking at the first meal being between the 3, I would say the 3 and 5 month mark.
3 and 5 month
Ready,
mark?
ready in place.
Yes. So it wouldn't be a problem if you waited for the budget process to get through?
It would just delay it a little bit, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Liggett.
My other question had to do with consultation. You state you're going to consult the neighborhood around where a facility will go. When is that process? And if the neighborhood doesn't, if the neighborhood is really set dead against this, how do you back out of that?
Okay, yeah. So like our neighborhood work that we do on a regular basis, it's, we have discussions, consultations, we work through the issues, and if another location is needed, then we go to another spot.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I see no further questions. Thank you so much for your presentation and for your hard work. I know that you've been through many iterations depending on feedback. And we do note that you've been nimble to the community's requests and nimble when it comes to the number of faith-based organizations that are coming forward with offers of assistance. So thank you so much for coming in this evening.
Thank you.
Our next delegation is Michelle Braniff. Please come forward and welcome.
Your Worship, members of council, I'm delighted to be here. I'm here as a private citizen. I live in walking distance. Today I actually drove my car. I usually walk, and I walk fearlessly into the evening because Cambridge is a community that shares, and I appreciate that. So I'm speaking in support of the wonderful work about the neighborhood tables. Community is so important. It's not just about food, it's about conversations. It's so easy to talk about vulnerable people as if they are the other. They are not. They are us. That profile is us. It's our family in the past, in the future. It's our friends. So my son lives in Vancouver, and when he first traveled to that city, which may I remind you is on the other side of the country, and to a mother, seems very far away. He was studying at film school, and he went weekly to a faith-based table where he was invited and he was welcome. And he told me about the food. It was a Hindu temple and he loved the food. But what he told me is that the mothers really cared about him. So I knew that he had a family in that city away from home. And I think that's what we're talking about with these neighborhood tables. We're talking about connecting people. We're talking about love, not fear. And we've got some fantastic community partners who have done their homework, done their research. They're going to make this safe, and it's going to make the city a better place. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Any question or comment from council members? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation. All right, we'll move ahead. Councillor Adshade, you have the motion. Please read it in its entirety. Thank you.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'd like to speak to this when I'm done. Okay.
Yes.
Moved by myself, second by Councillor Wolf. Item number 9, the Cambridge Neighbourhood Table. That report 19-312, the Cambridge Neighbourhood Table implementation plan to be received as information, and that the funding for the Cambridge Neighbourhood Table implementation is referred to the Budget and Audit Committee for consideration in the 2020 budget. And I'd just like to, I'd just like to stay strongly in favor of this motion. I think this is a well thought out, well planned and researched, and there's a real need in the community for our vulnerable population. So I'm very, very much in favor of this. And it partners, what I really like about it, it partners with key social service, faith-based, and community groups. If you look in the, it's the who of service groups, the faith-based groups. So they've really done their research and homework. And it's more than just a meal. It's a program that promotes and states relationships, and social relationships are the key. So I think that's a very positive and way of looking at this situation. And I like the idea that they're spreading around the meal sites so it just not have an impact on one neighborhood. I think that's a really good thing. And also too, they've included in their draft presentation that they should be self-sufficient after 2 years with donations. So all in all, I think this is well done, and I'm very strongly in support of this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Wolf.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I strongly support the Cambridge Community Table. It fills a gap we have in service to our most vulnerable community. I am pleased that this is a grassroots initiative and that it is supported by 16 faith groups, 4 neighbourhood associations, Langs, and the Cambridge Shelter Corporation. Every day, I'm talking to more and more people who are excited about this pilot project. I just heard about a group of retired teachers who wish to form a volunteer team at one of the sites. Last Wednesday, at a forum called Changing the Conversation, I met many people eager to see this program begin. The guest speaker at the event spoke about the impacts of social isolation. The #1 determinant of health and longevity was having meaningful connections. He said that today, 27% of Canadians live alone, as opposed to 6% 50 years ago. I heard a statistic from Doris Anderson on CBC the other day that nearly 40% of women over 65 live alone today. In Cambridge, we have many citizens experiencing social isolation and food insecurity. We are often asked as a council, what concrete measures are we taking to help our vulnerable population? The Cambridge Neighbourhood Table pilot project is a step in the right direction. People can not only share a meal, they can share company and make vital connections with fellow citizens and organizations. Although I support the motion, I would like to make sure this project is funded immediately so that Cambridge can hire a project director and begin the community consultations. If we wait for the 2020 budget, we do not approve that budget until late January or February. And there is no guarantee that $70,000 will be there. So I'm moving an amendment which states the following: that report 19-312 CRS, Cambridge Neighbourhood Table, implementation plan be received as information, which is the same as the original, and that funding in the amount of $70,000 for the Cambridge Neighbourhood Table implementation be funded from the tax rate stabilization reserved as outlined in the report. And this, as reported in our latest 2020 budget document, the Rate Stabilization Fund currently has $2,829,834. And it is this fund that in the report is suggested by our Finance Department from which to take the funds if we do not wish to wait for the 2020 budget. And I suppose I need a seconder for the amendment. And
seconded by
done.
Councillor Reid.
Councillor Reid. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll debate the amendment before we go to the main motion. I have 2 other members that have asked to speak. Is it to the amendment? Councillor Reid is first? Yes. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm very much in support of the amendment, and I'm really pleased that it was put forward, because I think that the benefits that we can have from this neighborhood table are ones that we need now. We're entering into a winter period, and it's dark early. It's the isolation tends to be even more so, particularly with seniors. I sit on the Council of Aging, and we have provided programs that try to deal with the isolation, and we're very aware of the isolation of seniors. And this program would be something that would very much help seniors as get out and make those connections and keep them healthy. Give them something to look forward to and be a part of. Seniors aren't the only ones that suffer from isolation. There are many others who would enjoy getting out and meeting people and being a part of the community. The benefits that we get from that are tremendous. And the money that we spend here would be a pittance compared to what we would gain in our community from this. I know that that as we move forward with this and we look at taking away stigma from some of our vulnerable people that we tend to have around there, the social inclusion that we would be able to provide for the number of people, and just the participation of so many different diverse community members, it would bring something to that neighborhood table. We all know that food is something that pulls us together. If we sit down together and enjoy a meal together, that's a start of a conversation. That's a start of a connection that we make. And we all know that those connections are terribly, terribly important into the health of our community and our well-being. So I'm really hoping that everyone here will support this and take the money from the tax rate stabilization fund reserves, and that we start with this immediately and not have to wait till maybe springtime before we can actually get it off the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaking to the amendment, Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. I guess I read the package and I knew what the motion was, and I was prepared to vote on the motion, and then this changed motion comes forward, and I was prepared to vote in favor of the motion and ask staff if there was any way that funding could be found in the 2019 budget. So this takes me by surprise, because it's not the motion I was prepared to vote on, and it's not the rate stabilization fund that's supposed to fund this type of initiative. Do I support the initiative? Absolutely, I support it. Do I want it to start right away? Absolutely, I do. It's important for our community. But I think we have got to be fair to each other and make sure that when we bring a motion like this to the floor, we have the opportunity to see it first so we can process it, instead of getting it right now and not having a chance to see it until right now.
Point of order.
An email on Friday with the amendment.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Mann, did you want to ask staff potentially about this particular one?
Thank you, Madam Chair, if I may. And my question would be, is there anywhere in the budget, in the 2019 budget, that we could find $70,000 to support this initiative today?
Thank you. Katie Fisher.
Through you, Madam Mayor. As Budget and Audit Committee convened earlier, we are forecasting a small deficit for the year of about $95,000. So currently there's not funding available within the 2019 budget. If Council did wish to proceed with this, the recommendation today, as opposed to referring it to budget, the only option that I do see is from the rate stabilization reserve.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Mann.
Thank you.
Speaking to the amendment, Councillor Adjade.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I just want to say I support the amendment. I have no problem with the amendment. I think this is a really worthwhile program, and the sooner we can get it off the ground, the better. So I support the amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Wolf, or sorry, Councillor Leggett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I now see the email. I didn't open that email. So this is the first I lead a busy life and I just didn't open that email. So bad on me, but I didn't. So tonight is the first time I've seen this. And like Councillor Mann, I wasn't prepared to deal with anything else. I was prepared to pass this motion. I think it's a good initiative. Obviously, Councillor Mann is concerned about where the money is coming from, and as budget chair, I think his input into it should have been taken into consideration. I'm wondering if there is a way that we can still take it to budget, but have it in time for going forward into the new year, so that it's still dealt with before we finalize the budget. And maybe we could deal with that at the Budget and Audit Committee meeting.
Okay, we'll take those comments for now, and I've got a couple of other speakers, if that's okay. Unless you wanted to ask staff.
Oh, yes, actually, that would be a good idea, I think, to ask staff before we go any further.
Thank you. Katie?
Through you, Madam Mayor. The budget is planned for approval in December. So budget delegations begins December 2nd, budget deliberations by Budget and Audit Committee December 5th. If all goes according to plan, Council could approve the budget as early as December 9th or December 12th.
Thank you. Councillor Wolf?
I guess I had my I don't need to speak right now.
Thank you. Councillor Devine?
Yes, through the chair. I read the email. I did open my email, so I'm aware of what's going on. I don't think we can delay this, to be quite honest with you. We have people that are cold and hungry. I do have some concerns about it. I hope we're not going to be feeding people so they can stay in their tent cities over the winter. I do have a concern about that. Okay, and we have to look at it realistically, in realistic terms. I don't think by delaying it, we could have a budget by the 9th or 12th of December. It also could be the 15th or 18th of January. Okay, let's not kid ourselves. We've had timelines before, and then all of a sudden it runs into January, bang, 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 for whatever reason. So I don't believe we're going to be able to have a budget by the 9th or 12th of December. Might be staff's wish. I don't think it's going to happen. But I do have a question for staff. And I support the program, and I support doing it as quickly as possible. And the question to staff is it possible within the next short period of time to take the $50,000 out of the rate stabilization fund, put that $50,000 in the budget, and when the budget gets passed, put it back into the rate stabilization fund? Is that possible? I know we got some funny accounting errors with city and municipalities and municipal act.
Councillor Devine, can I just suggest, is it 50,000 or 70,000?
I'm sorry, 70,000. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
What's 20,000 bucks among friends?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So if I understand correctly, proceed with funding it today from the rate stabilization.
Correct.
Would effectively include a contribution back into the rate stabilization in the 2020 budget.
Correct.
I do not see any concern with that.
Thank you. I'm in favor.
Thank you. Councillor Reid?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm very much in favor, as I've already said, but I also want to say I think that we're not that accustomed to doing amendments to motions, and I think that sometimes we get hung up on amendments. I know that Councillor Wolf did her best to get that information out to everybody so that they would not be caught unawares of what was happening, but mistakes happen, and these things do happen. But certainly in any kind of organization, an amendment to a motion is always something that can happen, and it may not be one you've heard before. So I think that we're just not that accustomed to doing that, and so it makes us feel a little uncomfortable. I'm not at all uncomfortable with this amendment to this motion. We have heard from our staff in our financial area that this is a recommendation, that they think that this is the best way to handle this. So I think we just need to go forward. All of us agree this is a great program, and we want it to start, and we want it to start as soon as it possibly can. So I'm hoping that we can put aside some of our fears and trepidations and go forward and support this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Mehta.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. Just a question for clarification. If we did go with this amendment, the group would still be able to have the neighborhood meeting in ample time before anything opens up? Thank you.
I believe that the timeline has been set out in the proposal that the organization has taken both to the region and to the city, and I'll look for nods from yes. So they would be prepared to move ahead as quickly as possible, and I think that that's what Ms. McComb said, that they, as soon as the money flows, they're able to move ahead. Does that answer your question? And I'm accurate? Nods? Yes, thank you. Councillor Liggett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a couple of comments is we actually do work with amendments all the time. I think we do that fairly regular around this horseshoe, right? But just a word of caution, sometimes it's easy to just pick up the phone and say, you know, I'm doing this. And I know I'm a culprit for that too, where I sometimes will do amendments to things without notifying people. But this is a big thing here. This is a lot of money. It's a major initiative. I've said before, I support this initiative 100%. My concerns for security, they're addressing that. So I'm happy with this. I do have a question though, and maybe Madam Chair, you can answer this one. The region has given one-time funding from a particular grant, but that doesn't get approved because that just came from their finance committee. That doesn't actually get approved until November 13th. It'll be ratified possibly or possibly not. I expect it will be by regional council. So that's one time. So what goes, if something goes wrong here, even next year, if the funding isn't done again, what happens to us if we now go forward and say we are going to do this for the next 2 years? Do they come back to us and say, we would like you to pick up, but the region's not picking up?
And that's a good question. I'll answer it as regional councillor because I was there during the delegations and the committee that passed through the Community Innovation Grant. It was a $50,000 grant only awarded to one organization in the region, so we proudly and unanimously supported this vote. There were a couple of options during the deliberations, and the one that actually passed was that the money flows from the region without needing to check in with Cambridge whether they were supporting it. That was the second option that was on the table, meaning the money wasn't going to flow unless Cambridge Council supported it, but that didn't even go forward. It was a unanimous approval of the one-time funding of $50,000. During that delegation process, a question was asked of the delegation what would happen if they weren't able to get the money from Cambridge. And with the support from the community, I believe the answer was that they feel that they can do the fundraising on top of that. It might just roll out a little bit more slowly while they try and get more funding. but they're fairly secure with the knowledge that there's enough faith-based organizations and community that is moving forward to try and support this program, that they're going to do it anyway. It would just really sort of impact on their guideline, on their timelines. So it was not contingent on Cambridge Council. That money will still flow. Does that answer your question? Yep, go ahead. Hang on, I'll turn on your mic.
Our motion is just for 2020 budget. So we're just doing the 1 year at this point in time with consideration again the following year for the second year. Okay, I'm fine with the amendment then.
All right, thank you. And I might just add in a comment here that any amendments from members of council, if they come to the clerk can ensure that the members of council are duly notified when amendment comes forward. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm fine with the amendment knowing that the only alternative is to bring it out of the Rate Stabilization Fund. I think Cambridge is a community that cares, and I think we've always demonstrated that, and we have a number of people in our community who rely on a warm meal, and we have the opportunity to support that, and I want to make sure that we do. This is a good initiative, and it's important that we provide that social inclusiveness that is so necessary to so many people in our community. And, you know, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care, and when people know that you care enough to feed them, then they will be able to care a little bit more about themselves and do things together with others. And I think that's what's so important. And I don't want to sidetrack this initiative. It's important for our community, and it's an important first step. And coming out of the rate stabilization is, I wish we had a surplus. Let me say this. I wish we had a surplus in the budget, Katie, so that it could come out of that surplus. But the second best is rate stabilization. Thank you.
Thank you. And just before I go to Councillor Wolf, I did want to just make a couple of comments. I did hear the Bridges fundraiser from last week. John Lord spoke, and almost the first words out of his mouth is social isolation and the extreme mental health issues that it causes in our society. And one of the best things that we can do as a community is to promote those areas where we can provide for social inclusion. And this is definitely one of those initiatives. And I really, again, thank the not only the organizers, but the community from coming around behind you to support this initiative. I think that this is one of the best things that we as council can support in order to help make an impact on those that are suffering from social isolation and mental health issues in our community. So thank you again. And with that, I'll move to Councillor Wolf.
Through Madam Mayor, I just want to thank Council for their support and their understanding, and thank the committee that it's been basically 2 years long work, research, frustration, but hope, and so many people coming together to do a great thing. And I would ask for a poll vote.
Okay, and with no further comments, then I will call the question. All those in favor? This is me. Please cast your vote.
It's cast.
Oh, it's cast. Okay. It's completed. Okay. Now I go there. Bear with me. Now I'm going to cast your vote. Just getting used to new technology. It's that pregnant pause, isn't it? And that vote carries. 8-0. And that vote carries unanimously. Thank you so very much for this evening. Okay, we will move forward with our next item, which is a notice of motion on the climate emergency declaration. And our first delegation is Cameron Dearlove from the Cambridge Self-Help Food Bank. Welcome, Cameron.
Hey, good evening, Madam Mayor and members of council. My name is Cameron Dearlove. I'm the Executive Director of the Cambridge Self-Help Food Bank, and I'm joined by Siobhan Bonesteel, our Manager of Food Procurement and Local Food Development, which almost fits on a business card, just about. Now, you may be wondering why it is that a food bank is speaking on this issue. Many of the people who visit our food bank are experiencing poverty, and as with all environmental crises, the impacts will be disproportionately felt by those who live in poverty. Consider this. It is projected that for every degree of global warming, the world's yield of wheat will fall by 6%, corn by 7.4%, and rice and soybeans both by a little more than 3% each. Together, these four crops account for 2/3 of the calories consumed by humans. The world population is growing by 80 million people each year on average, and that math is looking pretty stark. Of course, 1.5 degrees is the aspirational target under the Paris Agreement. Currently, the planet has already warmed 1 degree, and current GHG emission patterns show us not meeting that 1.5 degree target. Now, the reduction in global food yields, even at 1.5 degrees, will be devastating. And as prices rise, those in the lowest incomes will be most affected. For a food bank, this is a nightmare scenario, since so much of what we distribute is based on surplus food. Now, the climate crisis is full of inequities. While the wealthiest countries and wealthiest individuals leave the largest carbon footprint, those who live in poverty will bear the heaviest burden. This is most understood to be the case in developing countries, but this is also true here in Canada and here in Cambridge. We all know about the skyrocketing price of housing, and we see that some of the results with rising homelessness. Currently, many working poor in our own community average $7.33 a day after paying housing and bills, which is not enough to purchase food to live on, and particularly not enough to purchase healthy food. The cost of housing and the cost of food are already far outstripping rises in incomes. Just imagine what this will look like for people who are food insecure when we start to have declining yields, food disruptions, and worse. This is a global crisis, and it requires bold leadership from people and groups all around the world. There will surely be those who will say that an individual or a city can't have a global impact. Instead, what we need is for everyone and every city to play a role, and that starts with taking leadership now. At the Cambridge Self-Help Food Bank, we've been doing just that, and will continue to change the ways that we operate to make an impact. Already a leader in this area, our food bank aims to build a local food movement that will not only grow healthy, organic food for our community, but also teach people about how to grow their own food. What if, at a time in the future, when the world is experiencing food shocks and food shortages, people in Cambridge have food to share because we're resilient and have increased the food that we grow every year? Now, Siobhan will get into some of the details of the work that we've done to date.
The Cambridge Self-Help Food Bank, on average, moves about 85,000 pounds every month of food to those in need. About 35,000 pounds or so of that is perishable food. So that is food that we are diverting from landfills to feed people. We're protecting the environment, and we're saving the community money. As we know, garbage is expensive. One of the ways that we're combating climate change is through our 5 community gardens that we work in partnership with. What we know is that community gardens sequester carbon, they reduce the carbon footprint of food transported over long distances, they support pollinator habitats, and they do all of that while feeding people fresh, healthy food grown in community. They also increase social capital. Our gardens are also participating in some really wonderful research studies. So we worked with Seeds of Diversity a few years ago, and we grew carrots to see which variety would grow well in our climate, so that we're participating in making sure that we understand our food system to protect ourselves from climate change. We also run environmental and climate change adaptation programs. This year alone, we planted 500 seeds with children across schools in Cambridge. We also run a number of other programs, including our regular garden program that teaches hundreds of people every year how to grow food. In addition to growing food, we also incorporate that food at the food bank. We do that through a number of programs. Global Kitchen is an example of that, where each month we travel to a different country and we cook foods from that country. We run a gleaning program, and I have spoken to council about this before, and this year was actually our most successful year. We saved more than 1,000 pounds of fruit from local fruit trees that people were otherwise throwing in the landfill. We started a seed share program, and since this spring, we've distributed over 1,200 packets of seeds. Food Savers Club is a great example of the work that we're doing to divert food from landfills. Through this program, we have saved more than 11,000 pounds and converted that into more than 8,500 meals. Coming soon, we have a new project which we're calling Protein Project, where we're working with local growers to bring more healthy, sustainable proteins into the food bank. We are in a partnership with a number of organizations, including Idea Exchange, and coming next year, we will distribute more than 4,000 packets of seeds. We've also reduced our garbage by 66% by creating a green bin program, and we've been working with the Compost Council of Canada, and we will be next year adding an on-site composter, which will create soil for our gardens.
So I think it's clear why we were recently named an Ontario Local Food Champion, and we ask you to support this motion and declare a climate emergency. We also ask that any committees or initiatives that are developed invite us in to work in partnership on this issue, because we believe that we're a vital community partner in this regard. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It always is helpful when you come forward with offering to volunteer immediately past a presentation. Much appreciated. Members of council, are there any comments or questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation. The next delegate was not able to stay. That was Sherilyn Matthew Vatisse from SMV Energy Solutions, who passed on the comment she would support in this motion but was not able to stay for her time for delegation. So we're going to move next to the next delegation. Paul Robertson, please come to the podium and welcome.
Mayor, City Council members, members of the public. My name is Paul Robertson and I'm from Preston. I'd like to apologize for my appearance today. I've decided to limit my shaving to once every other week in order to reduce my carbon footprint. So now there's no longer a climate emergency. Ridiculous? Of course it is. Just like the motion before City Council tonight. There seems to be some basic facts that are being ignored by those that are claiming that there's a climate emergency and also claiming that Canada is to blame for it. They throw out figures that Canada's temperatures are rising at 2, 3, 5 times the rate of the rest of the world, and it's all Canada's fault. Are the temperatures rising? Some claim they are, some say no. But let's look at some basic facts. Okay? Want to know what tomorrow's weather is going to be? Check today's weather in Chicago. Okay? Why, you may ask? Climate moves west to east. Okay? Whatever happens in Chicago, we'll be following along into Cambridge shortly after that. Now, some of you may have heard of something called a jet stream. Winds that blow from west to east all around the world. We have a polar jet stream that flows across most of Canada, gets us pretty cold at times, and parts of the U.S. And we have a subtropical jet stream that flows across Central America. So jet streams flow predominantly from west to east. They also move up and down, and there's also the same type of jet streams in the southern hemisphere. Now, contrary to what the Flat Earth Society may say, the Earth is a globe, and the air currents flow in a circle around this little blue planet. Now, no one wants to build their home downwind from a sewage treatment plant, but there are times when a house is built and then the sewage treatment plant goes in afterwards. On a more global scale, the sewage treatment plant is actually a coal-fired generating station that are being built upwinds of us in places like China. In 2018, China sourced over 59% of its energy from coal, although some reports put that as high as 70%, and China also produces 29% of the world's carbon emissions. In Inner Mongolia, there's a thermal power plant, which the Chinese government had pledged to stop construction of 2 years ago in 2017. But construction didn't stop, and the plant is now in operation, delivering 700 megawatts of power to China's north. And even as China committed to reducing emissions, recently at least 3 new large coal-fired power generating stations appear to be either operating or under construction in Inner Mongolia in northern China. China has also made more than $244 billion in energy investments abroad since 2000. The bulk of it goes into oil and gas, but investments of over $50 billion has gone towards coal. Also, a report this past January found that more than 1/4 of coal plants under development outside of China have some commitment or offers of funds from Chinese financial institutions. And each of these developments is looking at a lifespan of 50 to 60 years. Why? As a market for Chinese coal. So the City of Cambridge wants to jump on board and declare a climate emergency, an effort that has less effect than a fart in a hurricane, nothing more than a feel-good declaration instead of looking at the root causes and taking actions there. I urge Council to reject this motion and instead take actions that will have concrete effects, starting with the Purchasing Department, stopping the purchasing of products from countries that have no emissions controls and continue to add to the carbon emissions. I spoke the other week on this as well, and it was reported in the Cambridge Times, and I was checking the comments on the article, and apparently majority of the people support me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Are there any comments or questions of the delegate from members of council? Seeing none, thank you very much. The next delegate that we have is Andre Fuentes. Welcome, Andre. Did I say it right? Not quite, I can tell.
Close enough. I mean,
Andreas.
I grew up in the education system. I've heard everything. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.
This is, I think, the 8th time I've spoken to a council locally. So I'm part of the group that's been going around talking to councils to push for this motion. I studied climate change at the University of Waterloo, and now locally work at a publishing company, but also do some consulting on climate change at the UNFCCC, so the climate negotiations. The international climate negotiations. So I just want to briefly speak about why what we are facing is an emergency and why declaring this climate emergency is so important. So in October of last year, the International Panel on Climate Change put out a report that looked at the difference between 1.5 degrees warming and 2 degrees warming, which were the 2 targets that were mentioned in the Paris Agreement, to which Canada and pretty much every country in the world, except now the United States, has signed on to. And what they discovered was, 1, the difference between 1.5 degree warming and 2 degrees was actually significant. And 2, that if we were to actually try to stay within 1.5 degree of warming, we needed to act quickly. If we are to stay within 1.5 degrees, we need to reduce our emissions by 50% by 2030 and reach carbon neutrality by at the latest 2050. To put that into context, we've already locked in pretty much 1 degree of warming. And what that means for this region is an increase in extreme weather days, like hot weather days, an increase in extreme rainfall, and an increase in wind and high wind days. And all of these things will impact not just people personally, but also people's properties in the municipality. So this is not just an issue of the environment or rights or climate justice, but it's also a financial issue for all of us. One of the key things about the climate emergency movement is that while it is an international movement, having been declared in over 1,000 jurisdictions, including the Parliament of the UK, the National Assembly of France, the Canadian government, and 7 jurisdictions in this region, it is locally focused. So there is no central organization coordinating these motions. It has been brought forward locally by individuals, concerned councillors in each of the different jurisdictions. And I think the key to this is, while it is a statement, it does not mean it is useless. I think the importance of this statement is threefold. One, it is a message to the community that this is a key priority and that we need to focus and act on it now. And we, as mentioned, need to have the buy-in of the community. This will not be solved just by governments. It will be solved by everyone buying into this. And it's a message to other levels of government that everyone needs to pull together, and that municipalities also need support. Municipalities are at the forefront of a lot of the impacts that will be faced, and will need the support of our federal and provincial governments to be able to take the action necessary. And it is also a reminder to keep the climate emergency in mind on every decision made. Everything from sports fields and the fact that we will not be able to have artificial turf because it will be too warm to play on it, down to new developments and transportation, all must take into account the climate emergency and climate change that we are facing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Questions and comments from members of council? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming in. So we do have correspondence that has been received on this item. I'm sorry we don't take questions from the audience, and it's not a public meeting, so won't be able to address your comments, but thank you for being here. There has been correspondence that was delivered to your seat tonight on this item, which has been placed there from Shane Mulligan and Susan Brown. Councillor Liggett, this is your motion. Will you please read it in its entirety?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Whereas the Canadian government has committed to limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees as per the COP21 Paris Agreement, and whereas research indicates that Canada's temperature is rising more than double the rate of the rest of the world, and whereas municipalities are significant contributors to climate change, consuming more than 2/3 of the world's energy and accounting for more than 70% of its carbon emissions, and whereas the City of Cambridge is committed to climate action and understand our role as a global citizen and the need to be prepared for the effects of climate change, and will consider the impact of this when considering examining the strategic planning for the city as well as future budgets, and whereas the City of Cambridge is committed to community climate action by joining partners within the region of Waterloo in an 80% greenhouse gas emission reduction target from 2010 levels by 2050, and whereas the City of Cambridge has committed to community climate action by establishing a climate change adaptation committee with the goal of developing a comprehensive strategy that addresses challenges that climate change presents for infrastructure and long-term planning, and commits to continuing to pursue raising community resilience practices and infrastructure to withstand current and future climate-related risks. Therefore, be it resolved that the City of Cambridge declare a climate emergency with the directive to provide continued support towards corporate climate action at the City and work towards improved targets where possible. So moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Wolf, and I believe she has an amendment which is to go forward with this. If she wants to put that on the floor, and then I'll speak after.
Do you want to put her on the floor first and then speak?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
Councillor Wolf.
Okay. Well, I strongly support this emergency climate motion. It's very important that we bring awareness to our community that climate change is real and will have a detrimental effect on our city. Some people feel that we can have little effect on these changes, so we should do nothing. I disagree. At our last council meeting, Dr. Scott Hamilton said, "This is a local and a global issue that demands we take responsibility immediately and act in face of a growing catastrophe. As a City Council, it is very important we prepare for the floods, ice storms, extreme heat, etc., which we may experience in the future. We have already seen increases in extreme weather events and impacts like crop failures and electrical grid failures. Dr. Shane Mulligan wrote us today that the simultaneous loss of refrigeration, pumps, heating, elevators, communications, fueling capacity, and commercial activity is possible. We should envision this circumstance combined with a food and sanitary emergency and consider how prepared we are for such an emergency. These are the sorts of impacts city staff are going to need to address in the coming years." He also suggests that we make our motion stronger, and this is the amendment that he suggests, which you have in front of you if you look at Dr. Mulligan's letter, and I have run it through the clerk. And it is, "Be it finally resolved that the city consult and collaborate with the public and relevant groups or organizations in the process of addressing climate breakdown and meeting corporate climate goals, period." And tonight we just saw the Self-Help Food Bank come forward, and this would be an organization that we could partner with to help meet our climate change goals.
Thank you. Did you have a seconder for your amendment? Did I miss that? Councillor Adshay. Thank you. Councillor Liggett.
Yes, I am so honored. I have been an environmentalist my entire life above all else. I want to thank, in particular, Andre Fuentes Martinez, who spoke earlier, Kai Reimer Watts, Katarina Lindemann. They're the three that approached us back end of August, 1st of September, I think, to talk to us about the work that they were doing within the region. And I'm very grateful for the three of those people for bringing this forward. When we look at how much money we put out in insurance for our house to protect it from acts of God, acts of nature, whatever you want to call it, we put a huge percentage of our money into protecting ourselves just in the off chance that something might happen. So to those people who disagree with what we're doing tonight, I would say, what if you're wrong? So what we're doing here, I think it's a preparedness where the costs are negligent compared to what could really go wrong. And the only real money that we're spending here would be the economizing, but we're using tax dollars wisely at the same time. So we're fulfilling some of the goals and principles that we have within our city already by doing what we're doing. So I am so excited and happy about this. And I also want, if you'll pardon me, Madam Chair, I want to recognize that we have the very famous Louisette Lantain in the audience. She's been to the National Energy Board hearings for the oil pipeline. She's dedicated her life to the environment in this region and the entire country and world. And I think we should be honored that she's here with us in the audience tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Liggett, and we appreciate your attendance here this evening. Further comments or questions from members of council? Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. I have to get my notes.
Notes are good.
I appreciate the information that has been shared with us by the speakers and the delegations this evening. I heard Cameron Dearlove referred to it as a climate crisis on 2 occasions. And what I did was I had staff look up for me the difference between a crisis versus an emergency. And to me, with my background, an emergency is something that happens right now that needs direct action and some form of resolve before we move forward. And the definition is an unforeseen combination of circumstances or the resulting state that calls for immediate action, an urgent need for assistance or relief right now. Could that fit? Maybe it could. But I look at what's the definition of a crisis, and I know I'm wordsmithing here, but a crisis is an unstable or crucial time or state of affairs in which a decisive change is impending, especially one with the distinct possibility of a higher, undesirable outcome. For example, a financial crisis, the nation's emergency crisis, or a situation that has reached a critical phase, the environmental crisis. So when I hear about it, is it really an environmental crisis that we're facing, or is it an emergency? And when I look at it, I look at the emergency as something that's more local, and a crisis is something more global. Does it matter what the language is on the motion? And would crisis be more appropriate than emergency? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any other further comments or questions from members of council? Councillor Mann, did you want to follow up to that?
If I may, Madam Chair, through you, I would ask to make the amendment to the motion that it would be declared as an emergency crisis, an environmental crisis rather than emergency, because in my mind, a crisis is far greater, far broader than the emergency.
Thank you. Both those words begin with E, so I can understand the confusion. We do have to vote on the first amendment first before this is brought forward, if that's okay. And so I'll just see if there are any other comments on the first amendment. Councillor Wolf, was that the one you wanted to speak on?
Through you, Madam Chair, I just wanted to add that I'm very pleased that staff have already begun preparation for the climate emergency or crisis. They've completed a year-long planning process to develop a climate adaptation plan, and the plan proactively plans for the expected challenges arising from future climate change and extreme weather-related risks. And that's one of the things we've done, and you know we also have done things like Gold LEED buildings as our standard for public buildings, our ban on single-use plastic, we have anti-idling bans, and other energy conservation plans that we will continue. And I think that by passing this motion today, we just bring awareness to the public that we are recognizing that this is a climate emergency, crisis, and that we are doing something about it.
Thank you. And I might just add in a couple of comments on the First Amendment and the motion in itself. This is a very important time in our City Council and our city in looking towards the future, not only of just Mother Earth, but also our communities, and making sure that we are resilient in adapting and mitigating our environment around us for the future. From not only a city viewpoint, this is another community that if we adopt this climate change emergency motion this evening, means that it's a cumulative effect with other communities that are consistently continuing to declare a climate change emergency across the province and indeed many other jurisdictions worldwide. I just wanted to point out that although we are a small municipality here in the big picture of Ontario, there are many changes in the province of Ontario that are showing signs of the warming of our climate. I might point to some of the concern around the boreal forest in Ontario's far north. I might point to the fact that permafrost that used to have just 1 or 2 inches melt during a summer season is now 10 to 12 inches deep and adding a huge amount of fuel load for forest fires. And we've seen increasing forest fires not just here in Ontario but across North America and other places. And on and on. I also wanted to just make a comment regarding your talk about flooding, which is what we have witnessed here in Cambridge, witnessed the flood of 1974 and some of the mitigation that the Grand River Conservation brought forward in order to protect us. I know that right now the IBC is really considered the canary in the coal mine, and a couple of years ago they were looking at potentially not insuring people and businesses for floods because of the ongoing issue of floods. So this is a very important time. I fully support this, this motion going forward this evening and doing what we can to add in with all the other surrounding communities. And I do want to thank members of council for taking a great interest in this. I think it's a very important ongoing discussion. So I think what we will do, if there's no further comments on this, is that we will go ahead and vote on Councillor Wolf's amendment. Then we'll move forward to talk about Councillor Mann's amendment. And then last would be the main motion. So if that's said, then we'll call the vote on Councillor Wolf's amendment, and we've been asked for a poll vote on that. Members, please cast your vote. And that passes 8, carried. So that's unanimous. So thank you. We'll now move forward to the second amendment, Councillor Mann's motion, or amendment, sorry. And is that a poll vote too? Did I hear? Yeah. Sorry, did we have a seconder for that, Councillor Mann? Seconded by Councillor Devine. Any further comments? No, we're voting now. Please cast your vote. And that's carried unanimous. Sorry. Thank you, and now we'll move to voting on the main motion and as amended. And it's a poll vote. What a surprise. Please cast your vote. And that's unanimous, carried. Okay, so thank you very much, and that all carries. And thanks very much again for all the interest that we've had on this item. And at the moment, members of council, I'm going to call for a 10-minute recess. 10 seconds. Councillor Mehta? Not to call you out, but we're now reconvening. Thank you very much for returning. This next item, on item 10, I wanted to make a couple of comments before we get going. This is a position that council has found themselves in that no council really wants to find themselves in. And I want council, staff, and the community to know that this has been a very difficult time for council members, for the community, for the family, and we're talking about filling a vacant seat on council from the late Frank Montero. So I really wanted to bring forward just a couple of comments from the late councillor Frank Montero's wife, Fatima, who I spoke to this afternoon, and she wanted me to sort of encapsulate some comments and some thank yous. So in her words, Fatima said today that she and her family were humbled, thankful, and honored by the support given to Frank and to the family by Cambridge citizens, colleagues from City Council, police, and city staff. Frank loved this city, and he would have loved the send-off that he received. She says he didn't ever want to miss a good party, and this was one of the best. She also said that he loved working together with people to achieve good things for the people of Cambridge, and she wants to see that this spirit of collaboration continue in the future in the city that he loved so much. Fatima wishes to thank everyone for their ongoing support, and she wanted me to let people know how much the people's good wishes and support have meant to her and the family in these last few weeks. So now we'll move forward with item number 10 on methods on to fill a council vacancy. And we have a couple of delegations on this item, Angela Raposo and Stephen Whitman. It's least see Stephen.
It's Stephen Whitman.
Welcome.
Through your chair. Good evening, Mayor McGarr and councillors. My name is Stephen Whitman. I live in Cambridge. I'm a long-term resident of Ward 7. Firstly, I'd like to convey my sincere condolences to the loss of Frank Montero. He was a well and loved, respected man in our community, and tonight you have a difficult task of choosing the most appropriate way to fill a seat. But to be honest, it's really not that difficult. Option 2B and 2C, which is to appoint a candidate chosen by council, is completely undemocratic. It should be taken off the table right away. Those options would never be acceptable by Cambridge Ward 7 residents. Option 1, which is by a by-election, has many negative consequences. Right off the bat, we can tell you it's going to be cost. Cambridge is already in a deficit, and council needs to be more frugal with its spending. The price tag associated with a by-election is unacceptable. A by-election timeline leaves Ward 7 without a representation until March. There are too many important decisions that have to be made by then, such as the budget, the CTS, the new community table, and the list goes on, that directly affect Ward 7 residents. Leaving Ward 7 without a councillor for that long is a disservice. Ward 7 hasn't even had its town hall yet, so the residents cannot voice their opinions and concerns. The time the by-election is also worrisome. It will be held in the middle of winter, right when people are on their winter vacation, not to mention the weather, as February is the most extreme driving. Ward 7 already has a low, mere 25% turnout for voting. Add the confusion people have over the need to have another election will leave the voter turnout at poor at best. Then there is the time and financial burden placed on the candidates. This is also an important consideration. The only positive thing is that it's very democratic. Option 2A, however, would also be democratic, but without the cost. It would be without the wait time, and it would also be without the negative consequences. Ms. Cody, runner-up to Mr. Montero, received more than 3 times the votes than each of her candidates. Mr. Montero only won the seat with a minority, over 40%. Ms. Cody received over 30% of the votes. It is very clear that Ward 7 favors Ms. Cody. In 2015, a similar situation occurred at a regional level. Runner-up Elizabeth Clark was appointed over 3 years remaining after the death of Wayne Wetlaufer. Ken Saling noted it was not financially responsible to spend $175,000 on a by-election. There's no difference as to what's happening right now. Ms. Cody is wanted by Ward 7. Ms. Cody is the Democratic choice, and she doesn't come with the high $100,000 plus price tag. And there's no wait. It's immediate. Ward 7 residents have that voice. Martin Luther King quoted, "Life begins to end, but in this circumstance, it's the system that begins to end the day we become silent about the things that matter." This matters. It matters to the city, it matters to the councillors, but more importantly, it matters to the members of Ward 7. They have spoken. Don't silence them. Make the right choice tonight and vote for 2A by appointing the runner-up. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Are there any comments or questions from members of council? Councillor Liggett.
Thanks, Madam Chair. If I could just reassure you that when any of us are not able to do our jobs, the rest of us pick up the slack. For instance, when Councillor Montero was in the hospital, he asked that I look after his residents for him, and he may have spoken to some of the others around this horseshoe. Him and I have always traded off on things depending on our expertise. I've done it with Councillor Adshade. I remember my first representation of residents was for Councillor Ametta's ward. We accidentally sometimes cross over the ward lines, but we always look after whoever calls us, and we would do it in the same level of work as what Councillor Montero has always done in representing his constituents. So I just want to reassure you that Ward 7 is not being left behind at all.
Thank you.
It's just a comment, it wasn't a question.
No, I appreciate that. I understand that fully.
Yeah, we look
it's
after
frustrating when we have a town hall meeting and it's been pushed off. And it just seems like there's a lot of issues going through at the moment that we need to have a voice on it right away.
Mr. Whitman, that's not speaking to the motion, and we haven't completed all the town halls in the units. We look after our own here, and Councillor Montero's Ward 7 is constituents are looked after by the rest of us. Thank you very much. I don't see any other further comments or questions. So, members of council, at the special council meeting on November 5th, 2019, council declared Ward 7 council seat vacant. It's now our job to determine which method to use to fill the vacancy. The Ontario Municipal Act legislates the options that municipal councils have to consider to fill a vacant council seat. The staff report outlines these, those being option 1, a by-election, or option 2A, appointing the candidate who received the next highest number of votes in the 2018 municipal election, Or option 2B, appointing an eligible elector through an informal selection process. Or option 2C, appointment for an eligible elector through an established selection process. Within the staff report, each option is broken out and provides a proposed schedule, financial implications, pros and cons, as well as suggested motion, which should help guide the process. Please keep in mind that legislatively, Council must decide on how to fill the vacancy on January 4th, 2020, and if an appointment method is selected, the candidate must be selected by this deadline as well. We'll put the motion on the floor. Councillor Ermetta, you have the motion. Please read it in its entirety.
Thank you, Your Worship. This motion is moved by myself. It's seconded by Councillor Devine. Item 10, methods to fill a council vacancy. That report 19-309 CRS RE methods to fill a council vacancy be received, and that council approve the council vacancy policy attached as Appendix A. And I'm just switching over here to the option. Do I put an option on the floor, or do I have to read it the way it appears on here? Because here it says to choose one of the options, right? So could I just pick an option and put it up for debate? Okay.
Yes, once you put the option on the floor, then we can bring the report forward
Right.
and discuss it from there.
So just switching to the option here, and that staff prepare a bylaw requiring that Ward 7 City Council vacancy be filled by way of a by-election and brought forward to Council on December 17th, 2019, and that the by-election be administered via in-person only, and further that the voting day be declared March 16th, 2020. But I do have a question about that date, because I would like to put the following week down so it's not during March break.
Just hold on for a minute. Councillor Matt, if it's all right with you, could we please have a discussion first, and then depending on how things go, then we can look at an amendment at that time. Would that be all right regarding the date?
Okay.
Thank you. I have a number of people listed to speak, and Councillor Liggett is first.
I would like some clarification. It talks here about the council vacancy policy as attached as Appendix A. So we have a policy listed here on page 90 and then we have Appendix A, which is about scenarios all the way down to the clerk deciding who the winner is. So what are we actually voting on here tonight?
The policy's under Appendix A.
Yeah, but Appendix A isn't the policy.
Just hold on for a moment, please.
Yeah, but Appendix A is on page 96.
The appendix is Appendix A, and the pages that you're looking at is a follow-up to that piece, but we're going to Appendix A.
So Appendix A
So for
is
clarification,
96. It says Appendix A on page
Just one
96
moment
with all the scenarios.
Just one moment.
For
The clerk wants to
clarification,
clarify.
Appendix A is the policy. The scenarios are just an attachment to that policy.
So we're not dealing with those scenarios. That's got no, okay. You had me scared there for a minute. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Adshay.
Thanks, Your Worship. And I just got a question that maybe Katie can help me out with. if we did decide to go with a by-election, we're looking at about $100,000 to do both internet and paper. And when I was reading up on this from the council package, it said we could get the money from the election reserve fund. So I'm just wondering how much we have in that election reserve fund and whether we could fund this by-election with the money in the election reserve fund.
Thank you, and we'll get Katie's mic on and she can answer that question.
Oh, mine went
on. Through you, Madam Mayor. Currently in the reserve fund, the election reserve fund, there's $273,000. With the contributions going into that reserve fund annually, we're setting aside funds towards the 2022 election. Currently, those funds are earmarked towards that election. So drawing today from that reserve fund, I would suggest has a budget impact over the next 3 years in order to ensure that we do have sufficient money for the 2022 election.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wolf.
Through you, Madam Chair. This is okay. Having a by-election would be my second choice. I support option 2C, appointment through an established selection process, and I will highlight for the public what this means. Staff have set up a process where eligible candidates would fill out an appointment application form to the clerk by a specified date. Prior to the council appointment meeting, the clerk shall certify a list of candidates who are eligible and publish in alphabetical order by surname any documentation related to the candidate. Each candidate would appear at an open council meeting and be afforded the opportunity to address council for between 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the number of candidates. And the order of speaking would be determined by lot. Each member of council would be then permitted 2 questions of each candidate. The candidates with over 50% of the votes would win the nomination. And then there's a whole series in the Appendix A showing how the voting would take place, which I won't go into. I know that by having an election is seen as the most democratic process. However, the fact that all councillors have been democratically elected and represent the city of Cambridge, and it is our job to make decisions. Through the Municipal Act, we've been given that power. So this, too, is a fair democratic process. It is very important that council begins to work as a team. In the fall election, Ward 7 had one of the lowest eligible voter turnouts in the city. Unfortunately, by-elections generally have even less. I hope by having an application process and deliberations in open council, we can choose a well-qualified representative for Ward 7 and not spend the $100,000 that a by-election would cost.
Thank you for your comments. Other questions and comments, and I might just add an addendum to that. I think the Township of Woolwich actually used that option when they replaced a council member vacancy a few years ago. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Your Worship. I support 2C because I think it's a compromise position, recognizing that the most democratic way, of course, is a by-election, but the cost of a by-election of $100,000 or up to $100,000 just seems to me that we can do it in a democratic way without having to expend that kind of money. We know that our budget's going to be tight this year, and we have to make some real choices about how we'll do this. To me, this is a compromise position which allows then anyone who is interested in running for that position or being a part of this city council can then apply to that process. So it opens it up and makes it far more democratic than just appointing the second person. And then we can choose from those people who apply once that they have proven to the satisfaction of the clerk that they are eligible to come into that position. So to me, this is a compromise way of looking at how we can fill that position in the best way possible and also to keep the costs down. Certainly, we wouldn't be forging new ground. Appointing has been done many times and in many places, and certainly we do it at the city in many cases. We certainly don't do it at this level of election, but we certainly do in many other cases within the city of our advisory committees, and there are many boards in which they're appointed by people. We do it with our Supreme Court judges. They're appointed by the Prime Minister, so I can't think of anything more important than a Supreme Court judge, and it goes by an appointment. So I think that says that it is a very democratic method that we would choose to use. And I am hoping that that this would be a compromise that might find favor with all of us.
Thank you. Next on the list, Councillor Devine.
Yes, thank you, and through the chair. It's a tough decision, but it's really not that tough, to be honest with you. If you go back municipally in recent history, say the last 20 years, 25 years, many years ago, councillors, well, they called them aldermen back then, actually, but councillors back then were elected for 2-year terms, and then went to 3-year terms. And then I think it was 3 terms ago, David Calder can correct me because he would know, I think 3 terms ago went to 4-year terms. There's 3 years left in this term. So it wasn't that many years ago that you'd have a 3-year term. And I do believe in democracy, and we can talk about all the compromise we want. We talk about the cost of an election, up to $100,000. Well, I got news for people in this room. Freedom is not free. It's not free at all. There's a heavy price paid for freedom and democracy in this country. A heavy price. Now just think, you cast your mind back a week ago yesterday. What were you thinking about? Democracy and freedom. You can't put a price in democracy and freedom. If we had a year left, yeah, I might agree, appoint somebody. But the only true way to appoint somebody is go to the person that finished second, to be honest with you, and I don't even agree with that. I believe that with 3 years left in that term, that we need to have an election in the city of Cambridge to fill this vacancy. You know, we made a lot of decisions on this council. One of them was the living wage, not that many years ago. Got chastised for that and how much it was going to cost the city. But this council didn't back down from that. We put the living wage in. And there was a huge cost to that. A huge cost to that. And the huge cost of that is minimal compared to this election. So just when you're casting your ballots on what direction you want to head, just remember, freedom is not free. There's a lot of people that died for this country. They would have loved the opportunity to come back and step in this soil and be able to vote again. I'm all in favor of an election. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Adshay.
Thanks, Your Worship. And I too, I've given this a lot of thought, and I know this has put us all in a very difficult situation with the circumstances, but I've given this a lot of thought, and I too support a by-election. I think it's the fairest, most democratic way we could do that. And as Councillor Devine pointed out, if it was 1 or 2 years, I could see appointing someone. But when you've got a 3-year term left, I think the voters and the people of Ward 7 should be able to have an election, have their say to who they want as their representative. So I support a by-election.
Thank you. Councillor Mehta.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. So you know where I stand. I support the by-election. With due respect, I believe that would be the most democratic approach possible. And if I lived in that ward, I would want to be able to choose my representative. And back when there have been by-elections back when there have been appointments in the past, I've commented to elected officials saying I think there should be a by-election. And I know that's their choice and that's fine, but I believe a by-election is the fairest way possible. And there is a cost to democracy. There really is. And, you know, people have lost their lives for it. You know, we're talking 100,000 here. I know it's a big price tag, but I believe it's well worth it. And I believe that ward should have a say in who the representative is.
Thank you. Councillor Liggett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too support a by-election. We heard from Ms. Fisher tonight that it would cost us $33,000 a year. We have 3 years to make that up, to get that back into the election reserve. And the kind of money that we spend on things that come up during a year, that's small compared to that. I have no problem paying that $100,000 based on what we've done in the past and are going to do over the next 3 years. Again, you know, I've heard words kicked around here like, no, not kicked around, they've been stated that it's about it being a fair process. Well, it's not a fair process when we have 3 years left and we don't do a by-election. It's not a fair process to the residents of Ward 7 for us to make a decision that they should be making. They live in Canada. They don't live in a country where tyrants rule and tyrants make the decision. They have a say in how the democratic process rolls out in our country and in our municipality, and they should continue to have that say. And the word compromise, there's no room here for compromise. You know, when you're talking about people and who represents them and who answers the phone and who looks after them, they should be the ones who choose that. So for me, there is no compromise. By-election is the only way to go.
Thank you. Councillor Wolf.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'd just like to point out that 3/4 of eligible voters did not choose to vote in the last election in Ward 7. And if we're talking about a fair process, is it fair when only 1/4 of eligible voters make the decision? And I'm not sure that that's more fair than elected representatives here also having an open forum and asking qualified candidates to come and speak and voting. I'm just saying that it's not a perfect process, however we do it.
Thank you. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, I agree with Councillor Wolf that regardless of the process that we select, it's not going to be seen as the best. It's simply because we're already into the term and we're already a year into it. The one thing that is important to recognize is that the Municipal Act does identify all the options as being democratic. So whichever process we choose is democratic as far as the Municipal Act is concerned. And I think that's something we need to take into consideration, that the Municipal Act says you can appoint, and that's democratic. You can appoint the next person, and that's democratic. And you can have a by-election, and that too is democratic. And appointment would be the ideal way to proceed, in my opinion, as it would save the city money. It would permit council to make the selection of our Ward 7 councillor and fill the ward quickly. However, I have given this a lot of thought, as everybody else has, and I've struggled with it. And as democratic as each of these options are, I think that the most democratic for me, in my opinion, would be to have a by-election. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Devine.
I know, I was just going to make a comment, but I'd end up in front of the Integrity Commission.
Thank you. Councillor Mehta.
Well, thank you, Your Worship, and I agree all these options, like council has the right to go with all of them, like I agree with that. And for me, the reason I think the by-election is the most democratic is because it's the people in the ward who are making the decision. I don't live in that ward. I don't think I should be choosing the representative. You know, I think it should be up to the voters. And I would love 100% turnout, even 50%. I know it's hard to drag people out to vote in municipal elections, but at least they would have the opportunity. And what they do with that opportunity, that's their choice. But everyone in that ward who's eligible to vote would have the opportunity to go out and vote. I hope they do. And if they don't, well, that's their choice. At least we've done our part in giving them the opportunity.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. Well, once again, I'd like to reiterate that it is democratic to choose. It does save $98,000. It does allow us to put somebody in place quicker, by January, rather than waiting until the end of March. It does provide an opportunity for Ward 7 to have a representative sitting around this horseshoe. And when we are 8 councillors rather than 9, it has the effect very often of a 4-4 split, which means that motions are lost. That's why we have 9, is so that the business of the organization can continue by not having ties. And I'm not opposed to an election, but I mean, obviously, it's a very democratic process. But I really, really feel that that $100,000 could be better spent in another way when we can use the Municipal Act as it is written for us to use and provide Ward 7 with a councillor by January rather than the end of March.
Thank you. Further debate? Councillor Liggett.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. You know, it's being stated here about, you know, the percentage of people that vote or don't vote. I would warrant a wager that based on all of the media attention and the hype that's in that ward already, that we're going to see a big increase in the number of voters. Pardon me? Record turnout. Yeah, probably a record turnout.
Can we not, no further comments from council members?
Probably a record turnout. The people of that ward have the opportunity to vote here. If they don't take up that right, then they aren't partaking in the democratic process. That's actually a decision they make under that democratic process. So I'm quite willing to give it to them, but I think we're going to see a record turnout there.
Thank you. I would like to weigh in at this time because I am concerned sometimes about the language about democracy. The Ontario Municipal Act, much to Councillor Mann's point, is our document that legislates the options that any municipal council in Ontario has to fill the options. It doesn't suggest one way or the other is more democratic than the other. If it wasn't democratic, it would not be part of the Act. So just want to point that out, that language, words, and tone are important, that any option that council chooses tonight is democratic, and we have these options in front of us for a reason. Further comments or debate? Seeing none, I will go back to Councillor Ermetta to discuss the possible amendment of a date. Can you put that on the floor and with a seconder?
Because I do have concerns about it being during March break, and I just was wondering, do we have the flexibility to do it like a week later, or? And I mean that the date could be subject to council discussion.
Did you have a seconder? Councillor Adshade. So in consultation with the clerks, change could be made for the nomination date to be to February 7th, and voting day would be extended to March 23rd, 2020. Do we have, do you want to comment on that, Councillor Metter? Can I go forward to other members of council that wish to speak to the amendment?
Thank you, Your Worship. You could ask.
So speaking to the amendment, Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What about moving it a week earlier? What's the possibility of doing that?
We will ask the clerk, but legislatively, we have to provide a certain number of days between not only council vacancy declaration, nomination dates, and those are legislatively laid out for us. So they're just working that out. But I suspect the later date is going to be the safer one in order for us to comply with the Ontario Municipal Act.
And I definitely want to comply with the Act.
So would all of us.
Thank you.
Just one moment. The earliest date we would be able to run a by-election would be March 16th, which is the date that's printed. No, that's the date we proposed. Oh, that's the date what we proposed originally. So, do you want to? So we would still be looking at deciding on which date, if that was appropriate. March 23rd would be the vote date. So I'm going to take comments regarding the vote, the potential change in the vote date. Councillor Adshade, did you want to speak to that?
Thanks, Your Worship. And I would prefer that if we could move it up earlier, it would have been great, but obviously we can't. So I prefer that we go on the 23rd. I'd rather we don't vote during March break.
If that's what council decides in the original motion. Councillor Devine.
Yes, I would, through the chair, I'd make a motion that we change it to the 23rd, which changes absolutely nothing, and the person that is successful can be sworn in the next day, still on the 24th.
Councillor Devine, we already have the motion that
Okay,
we're
that's good.
discussing.
That's fine. I'm
with
fine
the
with that. 23rd's good.
So you're approving an amendment. Councillor Wolf.
Just a point of information. It does cost more on the 23rd because we need security at schools. When the schools are closed and we can use them, we don't need the security for children.
Use churches.
Thank you. Any further comments, questions regarding the amendment, which would be a proposed new date of nomination date of February 7th, voting day potentially if this option is selected as to March 23rd, 2020. And seeing none, I did want to comment again regarding the discussion in the community, in the press and social media, that the process that we are undertaking now is a democratic process that's not decided by council in terms of options, but is laid out for us under the Ontario Municipal Act. And with that, I will call the question on the amendment, and that is changing potential by-election day to the dates that we just discussed. And that's a poll vote. And I'll call the question. Members, please cast your vote. And that carries 6-2. Oops. And that carries 6-2 on the amendment. So now we'll move forward to the option on the floor and speaking to the original motion, which is selection of a by-election as the option chosen by council. I haven't called the question, Councillor Devine, thank you, but I will. The chair will comment that when I call the question, I'll call the question. I have asked for any further comments on the main motion. And seeing none, a poll vote's been requested and we'll move forward with that. Members, cast your vote. Oh my gosh, what's going on here? What happened there? And that's carried on a recorded vote of 6-2. Okay, thank you. And thank you, members of council. And we will move forward with the next item of business, which is the consent procedure. The following items are in the consent procedure. If a member of council wishes to comment on any of these consent items, please let us know by using your mic. In the interest of time, we'll look to vote on the consent procedure in a block, but if you wish to comment, you are welcome to. Councillor Mann, you have the motion. Please write out the item numbers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Mike Devine, the consent procedure that all items listed under the heading of the consent procedure for Tuesday, November 19, 2019, council agenda be adopted as recommended. Item 1, council minutes, Tuesday, October 15. Item 2, special general committee meetings, Tuesday, October 29. Item 3, special council minutes, Tuesday, November 5th. Item 4, general committee meeting minutes, Tuesday, November 5th. Item 5, planning and development committee meeting minutes, Tuesday, November 12th. Item 6, the east side lands, north, south, and east-west corridor roads scope change. Item 7, Cambridge response to provincial consultation opportunities. Item 8, Elgin Street Storage Building air exhaust system. Item 11, introduction and consideration of bylaws 19-154 to 19-171 in entirety.
Thank you. Are there any items that members of council wish to comment on? Seeing none, I will now call the vote. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. Moving forward to notice of motions. Are there any notices of motion to be brought forward? Seeing none, we'll move forward to other business. Does any member of council have any other business? Non-jurisdictional items, are there any non-jurisdictional items? And then we'll move forward to the confirmatory bylaw. We'll now confirm the proceedings of the council meeting. Councillor Devine, you have the motion. Please read it in its entirety. I will try.
Okay, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Reid, confirmatory bylaw. I'm going to read its entirety. 19-172. Being a bylaw of the City of Cambridge to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of City of Cambridge at its meeting held on the 19th day of November 2019, passed and enacted this 19th day of November 2019.
Thank you. Any comments, questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that carries. And thank you very much for your patience this evening. We are now at the close of meeting, and Councillor Wolf, you have that motion. Please read it in its entirety. Could you click your microphone, please? Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Adscheid. Close of meeting, that the council meeting does now adjourn at 9:17 p.m.
Thank you. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah,